is at an alarming rate. Few, if any, platforms are truly interoperable, and the collection of and capitalization on user data has reached unprecedented heights. I'm also concerned that barriers to bringing antitrust cases have grown too high for the average American. Since the 1980s, case law has snowballed to create evidentiary standards that prevent harmed individuals from commencing meritorious suits with any hope of success. I'm looking forward to talking with you all today about the manipulation of market power through data and the FTC's efforts to enforce our laws. Mr. Delrahim, a year ago, you argued in a speech that, quote, data, even large amounts of it, may not act as an entry barrier in every digital market, end quote. Specifically, you said, quote, while there has been a temptation to use data as a proxy for price when determining the anti-competitive effects of a merger or conduct, end quote, that the value of consumer data, quote, should not be confused with price. But just last week in a speech at Harvard Law School, you indicated that large amounts of data can entrench dominant players in digital markets and cuts out emerging competitors. You said that data is, quote, analogous to a new currency, end quote, and that antitrust enforcers need to be vigilant about the collection, aggregation, and commercial use of consumer data, end quote. Has your view on the role of data in the digital marketplace changed since your speech last year?
Mr. Johnson, thanks for the question. I don't, I think both of those statements, I stand by them. I think one.
They seem to be
well, let me explain. I don't think that you can directly correlate data with a particular price, partly because data has multiple dimensions to it. For example, that just a user data, your data or my data, could be collected by numerous people here, and what we term as a non-rivalrous asset, meaning that its value does not diminish by the number of people who would have it. If I had a $10 bill, by the time I gave it to the second person, a dollar to the second person, it would be only worth $8. However, usage data is different, and that's something we're trying to grapple with looking at that. By that, I mean your data from 2015 to 2017, your viewing habits, your purchases, is not something that could be replicated by a new entrant who could start in 2019. So your usage data has a completely different value. It is much more unique than your user data. So we have to be careful about what kind of data and how we look at it, which is why what you guys are doing and the oversight is so critical. And what we continue to do to learn in this industry, the competitive impacts of data, is so important.
Thank you. Do you believe that antitrust enforcers' past reluctance to view concentrated control over data as an entry barrier has been a mistake?
I think it would be unfair for me to critique my predecessors' involvement of these. Every single transaction has different dimensions, and frankly, our understanding of the marketplace. This is a fast evolving market. And I think what the agencies know today may not be what they knew 10 years ago.
Well, let me ask you this as
Sure.
my time is running out. Do you believe that the FTC, Mr. Simmons, do you believe that the FTC has a overbearance on a policy that indicates to me that you feel like the risk of litigation is something that is a primary consideration in deciding whether or not to file a complaint in the case of a merger or in anti-competitive conduct?
The gentleman's time is up, but you have certainly may
So we
answer.
find ourselves in a situation where we're resource constrained. So when you live in that kind of environment, you want to be careful about the complaints you do file. You don't want to file, you want to focus on the ones that have a better chance of success and also the ones that have the most impact. So in that sense, we are concerned about litigation risk, and if we had more resources, we could bring more cases.
Thank you.
Now,
With that.
I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, I was in Berlin and Brussels, talking about privacy, talking about competition, expressing my fear that the Europeans, led by the Germans, are attempting to use their laws on this as a way of, number one, forcing us to adopt their laws rather than enforcing ours. And secondly, being used very subtly as a protectionist mechanism for European data platforms. Let me start out by saying that basically U.S. antitrust law was designed to protect consumers. European antitrust law is designed to protect the competition. I cast my vote with the consumers, and I think that 100 years ago, our predecessors in Congress got it right. We have to improve and reform both our enforcement in an increasingly globalized economy, as well as dealing with the policy differences that the United States and our foreign competitors have had. Let me say that I've expressed repeatedly that Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, has been designed to squeeze out competitors and help entrench large incumbents, and it has innovated innovation. Are either of your agencies looking at that, particularly leading up to this international conference that will be held here next May?
So we're very focused on the privacy issue, and in particular, we've encouraged Congress to consider and adopt federal privacy legislation. But one of the things we're very focused on and concerned about in that effort is the issues that you just raised with respect to GDPR in Europe. We're very concerned that adopting a program like that could end up doing exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do with our competition mission, which is to entrench the large dominant platforms at the expense of the smaller competitors and the new entrants. By requiring opt-in consent on such a widespread basis, you put the consumer in a situation where the consumer is probably only likely to consent